Bienvenidos al Tribunal Supremo de Elecciones, Casa de la Democracia Costarricense. Para la comodidad de todas las personas presentes, por favor apague o ponga en modo de silencio su teléfono celular. En caso de activarse la sirena de evacuación, mantenga la calma y diríjase a las salidas de emergencia en la parte frontal o posterior del lado derecho del auditorio y siga las instrucciones de nuestro personal
and
Los
emergency
servicios
crew members.
sanitarios se ubican
The
en el
restrooms
cuarto
are located in the
piso.
fourth
Si
store
requiere
floor,
de
one floor
información
below.
adicional,
If you
por
need
favor,
any additional information,
refiérase a
please
nuestro personal presente en esta actividad.
get in touch with
Se les
any of our
recuerda
staff
que en
here.
este
We are
auditorio
reminded
es
that in this
prohibido
auditorium
fumar
it is
y
forbidden
consumir
to
alimentos.
smoke
Gracias
or
por
to
su valiosa
eat any food.
cooperación.
Thank you for your
Le
cooperation.
deseamos una feliz
We begin.
estancia.
We hope you have a good stay.
Buenos días.
Good morning.
Quisiera pedirles a todos
I would
que
like to
tomen
ask all of you
asiento
to
para poder
please be
comenzar.
seated so we can begin.
Gracias.
Thank you very much.
Buenos días a todos y todas.
Good morning to all of you. Thank you for being with us this morning in the first event of the Summit for Democracy, this event from the Committee of Democracy and how to increase youth engagement and participation in democracies.
Without further ado, let me please ask the Secretary General of the Community of Democracies, Mr. Thomas Garrett, to please take the floor and open the event.
Buenos dias. Thank you, Patricia. Your Excellencies, dear guests, and youth leaders from across the world, I want to welcome you to the Community of Democracies Youth Leads discussion of policy recommendations to engage young people in public life. For my generation, I came of age at a time when democracy was growing in strength around the world and was offering a fresh vision. But I know that for many of today's young people, you've grown up in the shadow of democracy's challenges, events such as the 2008 financial crisis, the election of populist governments, and the deepening effects of climate disruption. A recent multi-country study by the Cambridge University Center for the Future of Democracy found that the steepest decline in satisfaction with democracy to date occurs between 18 and 34-year-olds. The World Economic Forum's recent Global Risk Report identifies youth disillusionment as a threat. And I think unless this is addressed, and urgently, this can only have a tragic impact on our world. Yet at the same time, while we hear about this disillusionment, that youth do not feel included in decision-making, there's an alternative block within the youth demographic, a group working to change this direction. Those of you that are here and those that make up the COD Youth Leads. Our Youth Lead program began under the Romanian presidency of the Community of Democracies, and it's strongly supported now under the current Canadian presidency of the Community of Democracies. It has the very active backing of the United States and of our host today, Costa Rica. These democracies and others within the Community of Democracies have identified the resilience of youth, their optimism, as important and key to our future. They recognize that youth are an increasingly relevant segment of our population in terms of numbers, for instance. According to recent United Nations numbers, there are 1.2 billion young people in the world, aged 15 to 24, and by 2030 that number is going to increase to 1.1 billion. Youth also exert increasingly more and more influence with the digitization of our societies, which means that high influential jobs and skills are increasingly mastered by you, younger and younger people. As you're going to see in this discussion today, young people are resilient, they're eager to contribute, and they're here to take their seat at the decision-making tables. In just a moment, we're going to turn to our COD Youth Leads and ask them for their concrete, innovative, and workable policy recommendations, which they developed after the very first Summit for Democracy. This report is a very solid piece of work, and it suggests policies that each and every one of you can take back to your home country and suggest for implementation. In the back of the room today, you'll find QR codes that will provide you with the full report in both Spanish and English. Thank you for joining us today, and I turn the program back over to our Master of Ceremonies, Patricia. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General. I would now like to invite to take the stage to Her Excellency, Ms. Elizabeth Williams, Ambassador of Canada to Costa Rica. Excellency.
Good morning, good morning. Buenos dias. Buenos dias. Bonjour. Good morning. Excellencies, Vice Minister Crystal Ward, U.S. Special Envoy Abby Finkenauer. Did I get it right? Finkenauer? Okay, perfect. Secretary General Thomas Garrett, youth delegates, distinguished guests. It is my pleasure to represent Canada this morning as President of the Governing Council of the Community of Democracies. The Community of Democracies provides a space where governments, civil society, and youth, the most important element, come together to support democratic rules and strengthen democratic norms and institutions around the world. It is a key platform for Canada's multilateral engagement to advance democracy. I want to begin by expressing my deep appreciation to the Community of Democracies youth leads and to all the young people who have contributed to the important discussion that we will have today, especially very early, 8 a.m. After an evening celebration. Canada believes meaningful youth participation is essential to the health of our democracies, and it is a great joy to see so many youth colleagues here with us today. This morning, the Community of Democracies youth leads will present concrete, innovative, workable, and I'm assuming some challenging recommendations drawn from best practices and ideas from the enthusiastic voices of today's youth. These recommendations offer new and innovative approaches for increased meaningful youth participation in democratic processes and political processes. I also want to recognize the Community of Democracies' continued advocacy for youth inclusion. As president and proud member of the Community of Democracies, Canada supports strengthening further engagement with youth leaders around the world. It goes without saying that youth are a group of dynamic and diverse individuals with unique perspectives on how society addresses contemporary and future challenges. Canada recognizes the contributions that youth make to a vibrant, healthy, and prosperous society. So really, what we're saying is that democracy needs youth, as much as youth needs democracy. That is why Canada is committed to creating opportunities for young people to meaningfully participate in democracy. Successful democracies empower young people and encourage youth leadership. Societies, in turn, make tangible gains. Societies become more just, more politically innovative, more responsive to citizens' needs, and achieve better stakeholder cooperation. By investing in capable, engaged, and dynamic young leaders with special attention to girls and young women in all their diversity, we amplify positive change in communities around the world, fresh thinking, and renewed vision from youth. These are all the essential elements to strengthening inclusive democratic societies. Canada welcomes and continues to seek more and better ways to engage in international and national conversations with youth on issues such as gender equality, climate change, the erosion of trust in democratic institutions, increased polarization, and greater inclusion and representation. The Community of Democracies is a meeting place where we can strengthen our cooperation. Throughout our presidency of the Community of Democracies, Canada will continue to support the remarkable work of youth leads and to support increased youth engagement and participation in democracies worldwide. Gracias, thank you, merci beaucoup, and pura vida.
Thank you, Ambassador. I would now like to invite to the stage Ms. Christelle Ward Hudson, Vice Minister of Youth of Costa Rica. Please.
Thank you very much. Buenos días. Primero quiero agradecerles el espacio.
First, I would like to thank you for
Bienvenidos
the
a Costa
space.
Rica.
Welcome to Costa Rica.
Es un gusto para mí
It's a
poder
pleasure
estar
for me to be here with you today, and I want to congratulate the youth leads that are on this table. Congratulations, and very proud to see so much youth leadership. I want to greet Mr. Thomas Garrett, Secretary General of the Community of Democracies, Ms. Elizabeth Williams, Ambassador of Canada and Costa Rica, Ms. Abby Finkenauer,
enviada especial
Special Envoy of the United States on Global Youth Issues. Thank you for being here, and greetings to all of us accompanying here in the auditorium.
como coanfitriones.
As co-hosts of the Second Summit for Democracy, Costa Rica has adopted focusing or centering on the youth and young population in the political processes of democratic systems. We consider that the youth are each time pointed out more by the mass media, political parties, social networks, as elements of change in political life of each of our countries. Therefore, it is imprescindible that democracies put away their young population from the risk of misinformation and political radicalization to ensure the full and informed and responsible exercise of democratic rights. We were honored with the invitation from the United States to be co-host of this Second Summit for Democracy, together with the Republic of Korea, the Netherlands, and Zambia, because we believe that democracy faces great challenges in all of the regions of the world. We have strong convictions that the values and democratic principles are universal. So, we have acknowledged the different instruments, international instruments, including the Declaration of Warsaw that brings us together here today with the community of democracies. Nevertheless, democracy faces great challenges in all of the regions of the world. Costa Rica is convinced that democracy is interrelated with peace and the right, the state of law, sustainable development, and human rights. And each of these pillars enable us to have resilient societies, sustainable and inclusive societies that enable improving the worthwhile conditions of life and opportunities for everyone. We have built a state model based on human rights that looks for well-being and dignity of people. We also think that democracy cannot be taken for granted. We have to make an effort, ongoing effort, to ensure the effective exercise of democracy. And elements such as the issue of youth that gathers us today here is supported by our Ministry of Culture and Youth, because we count with the national systems of youth that constitutes the National Consultation Network of the Young Person. The objective of this consultative network is to provide effective participation of young people and implement public policies at regional level. This network is constituted by representatives of public and private universities, community development associations that are legally registered and enforced in the national direction of community development of the country. Also,
Incluimos
we
los
include
comités cantonales de la
the
persona
canton
joven,
committees
que
of the
son los
young people,
que
which are
son los comités
the committees,
bases del
base
Sistema
committees
Nacional de
of the
Juventudes,
national youth
ya que
system,
están conformados
because they're
en todos los
constituted in all of
municipios
the
del
counties
país
of the
y nos permiten
country
tener una
and
representación
allows to
integrada.
have an integrated
Están las
representation.
instituciones
We have
parauniversitarias,
para-university institutions,
partidos políticos,
political parties,
organizaciones no gubernamentales
non-governmental
y
organizations,
organizaciones
and
civiles que
civil
representan
organizations that
grupos
represent
étnicos
ethnic
como indígenas
groups
y
such as indigenous and
En
Afro-descendant.
este sentido, debo
In this
señalar
respect,
con
I
mucho
must point
orgullo
out
que
with
gracias
pride
a este
that thanks to
proceso,
this process,
llevo 8
I
años
have been
trabajando
8
en
years
el
working
sector
in the
público
public
y
sector,
además
and besides
10
that,
años
10
sirviendo
years
a las
serving
juventudes de mi país,
the youth in my country.
que me ha permitido ser
And that has
viceministra de
enabled me to be
Juventud al
Vice
día de
Minister,
hoy.
Deputy Minister
En
of
este
Youth up to
sentido,
this
quiero
date.
manifestar
In
la
this respect,
voluntad
I
de la
want to express
República de
the
Costa Rica
will of the
de
Republic of Costa
continuar
Rica to
impulsando el
continue promoting
compromiso y la
the
participación
commitment and
en las
participation
democracias,
in
en el
democracies,
youth lead
in the
of
youth
community,
lead of community,
jóvenes líderes de la comunidad.
young leaders of
Estamos
community.
convencidos que
We are
Costa Rica
convinced
es
that
crucial
Costa Rica is
seguir
crucial
participando en
to
el
continue
Consejo de
participating
Gobierno
in
y
the
además nos
Council government, and
comprometemos
besides
en
that, we commit
fortalecer
ourselves in
nuestra
strengthening
contribución
our
a la
contribution
comunidad de las
to the
democracias,
community of democracies,
colaborando activamente
collaborating
con el youth
actively with the
leads
youth
o
leads
jóvenes líderes.
or young
Quiero
leaders.
agradecerles a
I want
cada
to
uno de
thank you,
ustedes
each
el
one of you,
espacio de
for
hoy.
the space
Muchísimas
provided
gracias
to
y
me
buenos
today.
días.
Thank you very much, and have a good morning.
Muchísimas gracias, señora
Thank you,
viceministra.
Madam
Gracias
Deputy
por haber,
Minister, and thank you
comentado,
for commenting,
y dar
and
inicio enmarcando también
beginning and
lo que
framing
va a
then
ser
what is going
la
to be
discusión que vamos a
the
tener esta
discussion that we're going
mañana
to have this
con
morning
estos jóvenes
with
tan
these
maravillosos y
youth,
excelentes que
marvelous,
tenemos
excellent
como
youth that we
youth
have here
leads de la
as
comunidad de
youth leads
democracias.
of the community of democracies.
Gracias.
Thank you very much.
Let me now go back and introduce our moderator for today's discussion with our wonderful youth leads. He's Andrea Benson. He's a political activist who's passionate about bringing people together behind a new vision for the planet. He is currently advising the community of democracies on youth-related matters. So without further ado, Andrea, you have the floor.
Welcome, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. As Patricia just mentioned, I'm normally a political activist, so you're more likely to meet me with a sign marching in the street than with suit and tie. But today, I'm really, really proud to be here in suit and tie with this group and for this event, because I think that together we have created something special. In the report that you might have read already, there's a lot of knowledge of how young people can be included again and better in democracies. In a crucial moment of our history, when sadly across the board, in most countries on this planet, in most democracies on the planet, youth engagement is going down. So we are facing a big threat for our democracies in the next decade. And today, the goal of this panel is surfacing some of this knowledge from the voice of those that have helped in crafting it, and hopefully inspire many of you to bring home these recommendations and try to make it happen in your national governments, in your international organizations, and even regional, local, wherever is possible. Because I think what we have done is good. So it's very important that it becomes concrete legislation as soon as possible. Let me now introduce our youth leads. They are here with us. I'm going to start from Lou Argueta, Mrs. Lou Argueta, sitting there in the center. Lou is the Executive Secretary of the Latin American Youth Network for Democracy. She has some supporters here. She has distinguished herself in humanitarian work and in the strengthening of democracy internationally, and as a specialist in an international development project pertaining to social, educational, and political impact. Thank you, Lou, for being here. Then we have Walter at the left-hand corner of the ring. He's currently executive director of Diálogos, a second-generation Guatemalan think tank. He has led different projects and initiatives in civil society on youth, citizen violence prevention, anti-corruption, and the response to COVID-19 for almost 10 years at local, national, and regional level. So a lot of experience for Walter. Thank you for being here. We now move to Tina Tin, here on my left. She's a lawyer specializing in international law and human rights, an expert in youth-related policy and legal matters. She provides expert advice to various branches of the government of Georgia on youth laws. Thank you, Tina. And last but not least, Dennis Sankale. He is currently Director General of the Youth Senate Kenya, an independent, non-partisan development and advocacy organization created specifically to spearhead a youth-led development model in Kenya, with a mandate to enrich a democratic dialogue and ensure youth engagement in national and regional affairs. So the person we need for today. Thank you, Dennis, for being here. I now pass the floor to our youth leads to present some selected levers or policy that we have crafted in the report. We're going to do 2 rounds of the table and then obviously invite comments from government officials and the audience. So first up is Lou on policy recommendations number 5.
Is this working? Okay, great. Buenos días a todos y todas. Andrea, thank you so much.
Good morning to all of you.
I am going to be speaking on policy recommendation number 5, which talks about general inclusion of youth in laws and public policy. As you all may know, and it's probably the reason why you're sitting here today, youth is an integral part of our everyday society, and the participation of governance and public policy processes is crucial for ensuring the needs and perspectives are adequately represented. Having young voices in policy making has benefits, including better decision making, increased accountability, and a more representative government. Research has also shown that young people can contribute significantly to the policy-making process. After all, young people have better understanding of the challenges that they face and can provide valuable insights on how to address them. Young people also bring fresh and disruptive ideas, innovative solutions to the table. This highlights the value of diverse perspectives and experiences in making better decisions. Having young people in policy-making processes and young people included in decision-making also become more engaged in their communities, leading to an increased accountability from policymakers as well. This creates a more democratic society where government is held responsible for its actions. Youth inclusion also promotes social cohesion and integration. When young people are involved in policymaking, they feel more connected to their communities and their opinions are valued. In conclusion, youth are listened. This creates a sense of ownership and belonging, leading to stronger social ties and community cohesion. However, despite the numerous benefits of youth inclusion in decision-making, young people are often left out of the conversation. According to the United Nations Development Program, less than 2% of parliamentarians around the world are under the age of 30. This is a significant concern as young people make up a substantial proportion of our global population. To address this issue, governments should prioritize youth inclusion in decision-making processes. As we are now in the Summit for Democracy, in this one room alone, youth from all walks of life and different countries are represented. I encourage you to take a look around the room. I really do wish that this room would have been completely filled up because it is a representation of how youth leaders also seek to push the envelope to ensure that they and others have a seat at the table as well. But we are also in need for the older generations to be aware of this importance and to keep opening up civic spaces like this one to establish dialogue, to listen to the needs of the youth in the world that we live in today. The creation of youth councils or advisory boards that work closely with policymakers is also a great option to provide insights and perspectives on issues that affect young people, and that can also be implemented. Government should also consider lowering the age of candidacy for political office to enable more young people to participate in these processes. And to close off, my message is this. The road off to any type of inclusion is not easy. I think most of us that are young have lived it. It's not a destination, but rather it's a constant winding road that's designed to motivate a lot of people. But it is up to us to make sure that young people are included in these processes and that their voices are heard, and that we do absolutely everything that we can to ensure that that is done. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Lou, for providing this overview of the topic of inclusion. That is obviously what we are talking about today. And this leads me to pass the mic to Walter, who's going to actually speak about policy recommendation 11. And just for the audience, we are starting digging. So we gave the intro with Lou, and now we're going to go in precise, concrete, workable solutions that we want to see implemented all over the planet. Walter, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Muy buenos días a todas
Good
y
morning
todos.
to all of you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you
por
very
la
much for the
invitación a
invitation to
participar,
participate
en este panel.
in
Gracias
this
al
panel.
gobierno
Thanks
de
to the
Costa
government of
Rica,
Costa
la
Rica, the government of Canada, the
Gracias
Community
por
of
la
Democracies,
oportunidad.
for providing
Primero,
an opportunity
encontrarnos
first
en
of
persona
meeting
después de 3
in
años de estar
person
trabajando
after 3 years
juntos,
working
¿verdad?
together.
Es la primera vez que nos
But this is the
vemos
first time
y
we
me da
meet
mucho gusto
each
estar
other face to face, and I'm very pleased of sharing this panel with these youth, young leads, that in their countries they do exceptional work. I would like to begin sharing that when we were designing the recommendations that we're presenting today, I personally achieved a reflection about the institutions at government level that have in charge the issue of youth that seem to be important to be reflected within the recommendations. Because what we have become aware was that the institutions that have in charge these issues in our governments need to have a certain level of independence and of capacity in order to operate and implement and execute the policies that directly address issues related to youth. And here I come back to the words of the Deputy Minister, where in a very detailed manner she presents how governments as this of Costa Rica have moved forward in an important manner in developing or in implementing institutional designs that will provide the capacity to these institutions of executing and of answering. So, in the personal experience of Guatemala, and contrary to the government of Costa Rica, in spite of the fact that we're so close, what we find is a National Council on Youth that by its institutional design does not have the capacity of implementing, first of all, public policies. Second, it does not have the capacity of coordinating adequately with other institutions of the government that address indirectly issues related with the youth, and besides that, they does not have any political weight. And this is not an issue of the institutional design of how it was proposed within the administration several years ago, the role of this institution, and is how it is conceived, or how it was conceived before within the culture of the public administration, the focus on youth. Therefore, what do we need then? What do we need to take into consideration for the design of institutions? What must we reflect on how the institutions are operating, addressing these topics? First of all, and I think it's very important, is that we must acknowledge that we need institutions that address the issues of youth in an effective manner, that they be strong, that they have independence to implement public policies, that they can oversee also in an effective manner other institutions that address problems related or issues related to youth, and of course with enough influence, political influence or leverage to have any incidence on decision making towards the youth. Besides, these institutions must have budgets that may enable them to implement the actions they find in public policies matters for the youth. And besides that, being able to align and monitor the budget of other institutions that directly are addressing issues related to the youth. This, besides, would enable having a clearer idea of how much is being invested by the states in addressing issues related to the youth. Accompanied of this type of measures, we need that the institution in charge of youth topics can oversee and accompany the other institutions. And very important to coordinate with them the program in a strategic manner to ensure that the investment made and the attention towards the youth issues be transversal or cross across. We must generate evidence of how the youth, of the current situation of the youth, of what are their concerns, what are their needs, and the institutions together with statistics institutes must generate and design national surveys that enable, in an important manner, guide the public policy evidence-based. In summary and in conclusion, I think that the most important is that we acknowledge the importance within the governments of having operational force or arms that can execute public policies focused on issues of youth in an effective manner, that they may answer to the needs that the youth has and open up spaces in different levels, such as, or as is being done by the government of Costa Rica precisely, to listen to the voice of the youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Walter. Thank you for providing concrete already perspective from Guatemala, and for linking it to Costa Rica. There is obviously a very important example of what we're trying to do. Now the mic goes to Tinatin. They is going to speak about policy recommendation number 7 from the report.
Thank you, Andrea. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I'm grateful of the opportunity to be here today and to talk with you on the policy recommendation number 7. I agree with my fellow youth-leads perspectives, particularly on the importance of addressing the challenges of youth participation in democratic processes, which is a complex and multi-phase task with no definitive solution. In light of that, a 7th recommendation of our policy document offers a tangible tool by introducing civic education in school curriculums. Transformative power of civic education is proven by case studies. Students who experience high-quality civic learning are more tolerant of others, more willing to listen to different points of view, and take greater responsibility for their actions to improve their communities. We propose 2 approaches to implement the 7th recommendation. Firstly, countries can address this policy priority at the national level by identifying potential gaps in their educational system, by including civic education as a school subject, similar to the example of Georgia, where civic education is a mandatory subject and is part of school curriculum and is being taught for several years already in public and civic schools. Secondly, member states of the Community of Democracies and other regional and international organizations can actively promote the importance of civic education in schools by advocating its inclusion in their respective youth-related policy documents. We observed a lack of emphasis on importance of civic education in international organizations' policy frameworks. Thus, amending existing documents could be an effective means to further encourage the governments to improve their systems. I would also like to draw your attention to the importance of considering education in a broad sense. Education encompasses both informal and formal aspects. Empirical evidence indicates that informal education is considerably more effective and engaging for students and children. Consequently, it is vital for governments to allocate funds towards organizations that specialize in providing informal educational projects and platforms to schools. Last but not least, it is crucial to emphasize the significance of innovative methods in teaching civic education. The European Union's EU Learning Corner serves as a successful illustration of digital learning platforms that offer age-appropriate educational programs for students to comprehend the foundations and objectives of EU institutions. The same digital platforms can be adopted at national level to facilitate children's understanding of complex issues related to decision-making processes, the functions of the governmental bodies, and how to interact with these bodies. This concludes my observations for today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Tinatin. And now we are going to end the first round with Dennis. He's going to introduce a very innovative idea that I feel is not very often implemented. So please, Dennis, surprise us all.
Thank you so much. Buenos dias. Good morning.
Morning.
In Kenya,
Buenos
we say
dias.
jambo, and then you respond with jambo, jambo sana. Jambo. Yes, thank you so much for the organizers for the opportunity to speak at this very important summit. I will share my experience and the work we are doing in Kenya in terms of rolling out the youth assemblies as a platform for engagement for youth engagement in Kenya. So in Kenya, in 2010, we promulgated a new constitution, which most of the people say that it is progressive. I believe so. And our constitution outlines national values, and principles of governance that speaks about democracy and participation of the people, inclusiveness, integrity, accountability, and transparency. More so, our drafters of the our constitution were very deliberate and very intentional on youth participation, because Article 55B of our constitution provides for the state to take measures and affirmative action programs to ensure youth participation, the rights of the youth to associate and be represented in political, social, and economic spheres of life. However, despite these all legal provisions, there is a growing disconnect between meaningful youth participation in policy, legislative processes, both at the national level and the county level. In Kenya, we have got two levels of government. We have the national government, that is the federal government in most parts of this country, and the local governments, that is the county government. Through our work and our engagements with the governments, we found out that government does not have structures to engage with young people, especially at the local level. This is hampered by institutional capacity gaps and skewed attitudes towards the contributions that youth make in policy and legislative work. So we, through our engagements, we were very deliberate and very intentional in rolling out youth assemblies in Kenya, in the 47 county governments, as a platform for constructive and inclusive dialogue between the young people and the duty bearers in our countries, in our counties. Sorry. So with that, we are able to identify the needs of young people and map up priority policy areas that county governments can implement towards realizing the economic potential and political participation of young people in our country. So today, in this forum, we are calling on governments, all governments, our governments, to give power to youth assemblies in our countries. By giving power to those youth assemblies, we are calling the governments to provide resources for these assemblies. We are asking the government to provide technical support to these youth assemblies, because I believe youth assemblies is where you get the raw data on how to address youth issues at the country level, at the grassroots level. We cannot talk about democracy if we are not engaging the grassroots youth who do not have experience, youth who do not have opportunities, youth who do not have, they lack, there is no constant communication or constant engagement or sustained engagement with the young people at the local level. So we are calling the governments to power youth assemblies at the grassroots level. For us to realize meaningful development, for us to realize sustainable development, we have to give power to the young people because we contribute to the majority, because we are the drivers of these economies. So over to you, governments, over to you, Madam Prime Minister. I am hoping that as we live in this forum, the National Youth Council of Costa Rica will be independent, will be resourced, and their capacity will be enhanced in order to propel the economy of this country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dennis. Power to the youth from Dennis. Thank you for the very important intervention and also explanation of exactly how we can support Youth Assembly, resources, money, and influence. This first round of the table was focused on institution, especially institution building, how young people and how youth voices can be included more in government processes. The second part, I think, is more focused on politics, which I find it exciting. A place where often young people have a lot to say, but they struggle to access the rooms of power. So I think that the recommendations that are coming your way right now are going to be very, very interesting for many of you. I just ask my dear speakers if you can keep the intervention around 1 to 2 minutes, because we'll be running late on schedule. First intervention is from Lou again. She's going to speak about policy recommendation 3. She's very interested because marry the topic of youth with the gender angle. Lou, to you.
Hello. Okay, great. Yeah, so policy recommendation number 3 talks about gender alternate lists in elections, which, as you all may know, are quota mechanisms that can be implemented that push for equal representation, not only of youth, but also of women as well. This list aimed to establish balanced representation in the political decision-making process, which I talked about earlier before, and give women and young people more opportunities to participate in the political processes, allowing also newcomers to set the stage for younger generations to come. The significance of gender alternate lists is not just theoretical, but it's also backed by facts. Countries with the highest percentage of women in parliament had lower levels of corruption and higher levels of human development, economic growth, and gender equality. And it has also been observed that women leaders are more likely to prioritize social issues such as education, health, social welfare, making them more inclusive and empathetic leaders. So a round of applause to the women in the room as well. Speaking pertaining to youth representation in public institutions is also critical. Ensuring that public institutions take into account the different perspectives that youth have, policy solution benefits that can range from experiences and skills, and that policy outcomes are sustainable and responsive to all citizen interests, needs, and specificities. Despite the benefits of alternate lists, this implementation poses a challenge. As of January of this year, there are only 31 countries where women have served as heads of state, and only 26.5% of parliamentarians in single or lower houses are women. In Latin America and the Caribbean alone, women hold 36% of parliamentary seats. At this current rate, gender equality in the highest positions of power will not be possible until 130 years from now. The lack of political will, inadequate institutional frameworks, and lack of financial resources hindered the adoption of this gender alternate lists. So to overcome these challenges, we need to create awareness among the masses, initiate conversations about the importance of inclusive representation for women and young people. We need to engage and educate political leaders, and empower women and young people to participate in politics as well. So all of you have a responsibility to make sure that more young people and more women also participate as well and are more involved in what you are involved now. Balanced political participation and power sharing between men and women in decision making is an internationally agreed standard. So implementing gender alternate lists is not just an option, but it is a necessity. If we want to establish resilient democracies and democracies that are strong and long-lasting, we need to take a collective responsibility and promote the participation of women and youth. It is time for us to recognize and acknowledge the contribution of these two very powerful and significant sectors and to give them a platform to exercise their agency. So let us work together to create a world where equality is not just a theoretical concept, but that it is a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou, for bringing up the very important theme of intersectionality in what we're discussing. Obviously, youth is just another marginalized group, that together with gender, other minorities have to be included in political power. Now mic to Walter to speak about recommendation number 13.
Thank you, Andrea. Bueno, con respecto a esta recomendación, creo que
In terms of this recommendation, when we are pondering the need of incorporating the specific case Guatemala and what we have seen in other countries, when somebody is at the legal age and register in order to vote, this has been designed in our systems, political systems, electoral systems, in this way. In the case of Guatemala, specifically because of weakness in registration of citizens, and then the post-armed conflict we had to try to put in place some measures to assure reliability. What we have analyzed actively within this organization, the organization I work for, this bureaucratic transition has become a barrier for youth participation in electoral processes in our countries. Therefore, the recommendation we make is to review framework standards for this type of situations in order to have an equal participation and opportunities to assure participation of youth in political processes. In Guatemala, we have elections this year in June 2023. We call it empadronamiento. It must be closed. Inscription, registration 3 months in advance. So the Supreme Tribunal can have everything ready to have the number of persons that will vote. This left outside in Guatemala out around more than 2 million youngsters because they didn't register properly. It's a matter that creates a very delicate situation, leaving 2 million outside the possibility of voting, but they cannot do it because they didn't comply with the administration process. This is not just a minor thing for democracy in our countries, thinking especially that those that would be affected by decision-making process from those in power are the youth. Therefore, we suggest and recommend is to have an important effort to review these frameworks, and countries who have these standards, electoral authorities to facilitate them so the youth can register in a more simple way. We have to avoid any mechanism of exclusion for the political participation of the youth in electoral processes, and mainly to recognize that it is through the vote that the voice of the youth can be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Don't get me started on barriers to democracy for young people. Yeah, there are a lot all over the planet. But now, mic to Tina team for recommendation number 18.
Thank you again for giving me the floor. I will be introducing recommendation number 18, which underscores the significance of combating misinformation. I would like to draw your attention to 3 main points. Firstly, what are the key lessons that the world should learn from the most extensive misinformation campaign of 21st century in Ukraine and Georgia? Secondly, what is the present status of addressing this matter by global organizations? And thirdly, how we can finally address the threat in a decisive manner. Firstly, as an example of devastating effect of misinformation is systematic information manipulation that have been applied by the Russian government as an operational tool in its assault on Ukraine and Georgia in my continent, Europe. In 2008, Russia managed to spread the fake news that Georgia actually started and provoked the war by committing the genocide. It was after 13 years when this complete false narrative came to the end as Georgia won historical case against Russia in Strasbourg court. Unfortunately, after 14 years, we saw exactly same scale of disinformation campaign exercised by Russian government against Ukraine. And exactly the same propaganda that Russia false claim that Ukrainian government committed genocide as it was in the Georgian context. My question to the audience and your excellencies present today is simple. How we can protect young generation who are extremely vulnerable to misinformation campaigns, even if the issues of global agreements such as genocide and aggression have become subject to misinformation campaigns that led the full-fledged war in the heart of Europe, gravely violating thousands of young people's right to life in Ukraine now. Unfortunately, to date, there is no legally binding document that would regulate states' conduct in cyberspace. While negotiations are ongoing, there is a lack of consensus among UN member states to regulate combat of misinformation and even online support for terrorism. The risks are too high to be overlooked, and I call on the member states of the UN, as well as community of democracies, to endorse the adoption of agreement on ICTs with explicit norms that will limit the state's abilities to manipulate the information. The governments shall cooperate to fund the transparent organizations that work on fact-checking in digital space and develop AI technologies to counter misinformation more effectively. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Tina Team, for bringing to the table a very concrete threat for many democracies and states at the forefront of democratic struggle, especially considered in just 2 days now, Russia will take the chair of the United Nations Security Council. So it's very, very timely. I'll now give the mic to Dennis to close the round with recommendation number 14.
Yes, thank you so much. I want, first of all, to agree with my fellow panelists on what they have presented. Secondly, is to support the recommendation number 14 in terms of establishing young parliamentarian caucuses within our parliaments. We are calling on governments to, support the establishment of parliamentary caucuses, especially young-driven or young-led parliamentary caucuses. This is a platform that brings together young parliamentarians to some sort of have a peer-to-peer review mechanism, and also to champion for youth-friendly policies in parliaments. In my country, we have got the Kenya Young Parliamentarian Association, bringing together all the young MPs, both nominated and elected. Sadly, in our constitution has capped the age limit of the youth between the age of 18 and 35. However, in Parliament, we do not have sufficient numbers of young MPs who are between the age of 18 to 35. So we have gone ahead to amend our parliamentary association constitution to between the age of 18 to 40, so that we can get more allies in Parliament to champion for youth-friendly policies. And this is because young people face a lot of barriers in terms of participating in political processes or political elections. We are calling governments, parliaments are the form legislative arm of governments, to support the establishment of youth parliamentarian caucuses all over the world. It is very sad that as young people, we complain about systematic marginalization and exclusion as we are outside. Then again, we complain about systematic marginalization and exclusion within parliament. This is because most of the young parliamentarian caucuses that exist are not well supported. They are not well funded by governments. They are not supported by way of having legislative policies to support them. So we are calling for governments because we believe that those caucuses are a platform to build the capacities of presidents, of ministers, as they discharge their functions in parliament. It is our call to governments to kindly support parliamentarian caucuses. I am looking up to get elected in 2027 as a senator. I don't want to find a caucus, an amorphous body in parliament. I want to find a caucus that is strong, that will enhance my capacity to effectively discharge my functions as a young legislator. And I am looking in 2027, once I get to parliament, I am hoping to meet these young men and women who I believe will be elected in parliament so that we can have a peer-to-peer review on some of the legislative work we are doing to impact the lives of our communities and the lives of our nation. Finally, as I conclude, in 2020, when we had COVID-19, 2020, government shut down to address the issues of COVID-19. Government urgently came up with responsive policies and legislation to curb the spread of COVID-19. As we speak today, climate change is a global issue. Governments all over the world are coming up with mechanisms to combat the effects of climate change. Governments are demanding for climate change action now. As young people, we have 20 recommendations from this summit. We demand the government to shut down and address the issues of youth inclusion in politics and the participation of young people in development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I look forward to our global caucuses of young parliamentarians in the next few years. Now I'll hand back the mic to Patricia, and I invite our youth speakers to listen to government officials' remarks and get ready for Q&A from the audience.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for the very interesting discussion that we're having this morning. I think we can all agree that it's very important to listen to youth. I would now like to once again give the floor to some of our government speakers that are here present today with us, starting with Ms. Christelle Ward Hudson. I'd like to give you the floor once again, Vice Minister of Youth of Costa Rica, to provide some comments on the discussion that was just made by the youth leads.
First of all, thank you for your interventions. We believe there are 20 recommendations that should be adopted by the governments. They're very important, but I would like to recognize, first of all, the importance of having legal frameworks and public policies in our governments to support the participation of the youth. This will allow us that our public institution will generate actions offline, lines of actions according to their approach. If we don't have these legal frameworks, we cannot generate a real participation, neither to sustain and have effective actions to deal with the needs of our youth. So we need action plans, strategic plans with our public institutions that can frame actions and to take advantage of the institutional resources we have in our countries in order to improve the conditions of the youth. A second aspect that I think is very important is to generate a real participation of the youth. In Costa Rica, through the legal framework we have an institutionalized entity that the Ministry of the Presidency, the Education Ministry, Health Ministry, the Ministry of Education, and the Ministry of Women's Affairs. This entity, besides having these ministers, we have the participation of 3 young persons that represent the National Assembly. They have voice and vote in order to advance the needs of the youth at country level. One of them is here, together with his other 2, Emmanuel Maciela, who lead this process, representing the youth. This is an example of how we can generate a voice and participation, real voice and participation of the youth in different sectors. As it was stated before, we have an assembly of the youth persons that represent different sectors of the youth. It allows us for them to analyze what are the public policies that should be implemented at state level and how we can generate a real participation. In conclusion, we have the need of inclusion strategies for women and youth. We cannot talk about democracy if we don't have spaces that really allow equitable participation and responding to a quota. It's not a quota by law, it's a real participation where women have voice, vote, and decision power. As it was pointed out, actions are framed where we have more participation of women, we have a more equitable and just democracy with a social approach. We want governments to implement this, to improve this. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, señora
Thank you,
viceministra, y
Mrs.
gracias por
Vice
tener
Minister. Thank you
en cuenta
for
también eso tan
taking into
importante que no
account
solo la
it's
participación de
not
la
just
juventud, pero
participation
también
of the youth, but the importance of having the participation of women.
de las mujeres. I would now like to give the floor to, once again, to Ambassador Williams. Please, for your remarks.
Muchísimas gracias por este informe y las recomendaciones.
Thank you for the
Some
recommendations.
great recommendations. I love the concrete examples of what governments can do who want to support and increase youth engagement. You know, the number one message that came through to me is governments need to make space and need to support mechanisms that already exist or refinement of mechanisms, and at all levels of government. You know, often at the state party level, we speak about national mechanisms, or in Canada, the federal level mechanisms. But what's happening at the provincial, in the case of Canada, and local municipal levels is also as important, if not more. Supporting youth engagement on cross-boundary issues has been a big initiative of Canada, including on climate change, on women, peace and security, and in a number of recent multilateral forums, for instance, the Permanent Forum on Persons of African Descent. There's a great young Canadian woman really pushing our government to figure out how to make sure youth have real participation in the forum and in Canada's domestic discussions on what we'll be doing. Generation equality, I think that was one where there was better progress from the start in making sure there was inclusion also of youth voices at the table. So creating awareness about internship programs. You know, there's often disparity in access to information, and we will only have true representation if we have diversity in those voices at the table. So diversity in education, in employment, in life experience, in addition to communities. Making sure governments provide not only space for the mechanisms, but the funding to make sure that your recommendations can be implemented. And the technical support, that was something I took note of also. In 2019, Canada developed a youth policy that came forward with 6 recommendations. And the Prime Minister initially was our Minister of Youth when he was a little younger. Now we have a separate Minister of Youth, but making sure there's representation and engagement at that political level is so important. We also, in 2021, had a State of Youth report, and I had not heard of it until preparing for this the participation in this event. But what will be interesting is to look through and see how is the government supporting the recommendations in that report. The changing of youth ages, I thought that was very innovative in Kenya to include a wider age group. And when I worked in Lebanon, they've done the same thing. And then I went, ding, 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 that's probably why, because you get better engagement and participation and representation in political bodies with maybe a bit broader age group. Here in Costa Rica, the other thing I just wanted to do a shout out is there's municipal elections coming up. And there's such a movement to try and make sure women and more diverse representation and participation in these local elections at the leadership level, so as mayors. And one of the things I think, even Canada, as we look at how to support better women participation in elections, is how to engage the youth in a way that's interesting and dynamic so that they actually want to run for politics. So I'll be looking through your report that way to see if there's some recommendations we can put forward in making changes to the way we support programming abroad and in Canada on these issues. And finally, on countering misinformation, I think this is going to be one of the great challenges we all face, and we'll need to work together. Youth have a better understanding of social media and the various platforms. And so working together to figure out how do we make sure people understand the importance of receiving a diversity of information or sources of information versus disinformation. And so we need to include the public on these debates. The civic education and creating more tolerance for different views, I think that's a really powerful message in gaining support for why governments should include civic education in all of our, in all levels of education also. So thank you for that. We need youth as part of, as we move forward into more digital spaces. We'll need your guidance, we'll need your expertise. And so I think also naturally there will be hopefully more space just based off of that alone. So thank you very much for inviting us to participate.
Thank you, Ambassador, for those highlights. Very important, everything you mentioned. I would now like to invite Ms. Abby Finkenauer, if I said it correctly, United States Special Envoy for Global Youth Issues. Please, have the floor.
Well, good morning, everybody. I am former Congresswoman Abby Finkenauer and the U.S. Special Envoy for Global Youth Issues at the U.S. Department of State. And it is a true honor to get to be here with all of you today, along with Vice Minister Ward Hudson and Ambassador Williams. Thank you to Secretary General Garrett and his Secretariat team for convening this very, very, very important discussion. Lou, Walter, Tinatin, Dennis, I want to thank you and commend you for this excellent report and also the dialogue today. I also personally want to say I am just honored that I had a chance yesterday to get to sit down with you along with our USAID Youth Coordinator, Sarah Sladen, who's with us today as well, our staff at the U.S. Embassy here in Costa Rica, and also with staff from the U.S. Department of State, to hear from you and have a kind of an informal discussion as well. kind of a back and forth. And I will tell you, I learned so much from that. I learned so much from you today. And I am so, so inspired by the work you are doing, by who you are, by everything you are giving to your countries, and also not just to your own countries, but to the broader global network. Just again, thank you, thank you, thank you. I know you have shared ideas today as well with even a broader group about how to open doors for meaningful youth engagement in democracy. And I know this is critical as our democracies are strongest when they meaningfully include all of their people. This gets to the heart of why President Biden launched the Summit for Democracy. For democracy to thrive, we must demonstrate that it can deliver for citizens and meet the world's complex challenges. And I simply do not believe that is possible without young people engaged in the decisions that affect their lives. See, you have provided today tangible steps that governments can take to integrate youth in civic and political life. I fully agree that we need youth voices all across the full spectrum of democracy, from leading civil society organizations to joining citizens' assemblies, from voting and to being sworn in to political office. You see, standing here today as someone who ran for state office in the United States at the age of 24, and then federal office in the United States at the age of 28, while growing up in a rural community from a working class family and still paying off student loans as I was doing it, I understand and realize the real barriers and also doubts that are put on young people when they decide to take those steps. I also understand, as you brought up today as well, the fight we have against the misinformation in the political space that is impacting young people directly. It is work that I know the U.S. Department of State is committed to addressing because of the fact that, yes, it is something we may not be able to just halt and stop, but we can do work on educating on media literacy, on reaching young people all across the globe about how to tell the difference between fact and fiction. It is vital for our democracy. I'm proud of the work the U.S. Department of State is doing in that space. But again, there is so much more we can be doing as we work together, and I am so grateful for your leadership on this as well. I also want to say, as a young person who ran for office in the United States, who was fortunate enough to serve in political office, I also understand the issues that young people, in particular young women, are facing right now when it comes to online harassment in particular, of entering a public space, whether you're running for office, whether being a public advocate. And I can tell you there is more that needs to be done by all of us in this room. You see, we can do the work of encouraging young people to run for office, but if we are not doing the work creating those safe spaces for them to feel like they can do it again in a safe way, then we are falling short. However, I will tell you that this summit has given me hope. I will tell you that these networks that are being created right now by organizations like Youth Lead are the ones that, again, are giving me hope by building connections and peer-to-peer support. There's power in recognizing that we are not alone in our challenges and that we can apply lessons from others to tackle our own hurdles. The Youth Leads are an excellent example of youth-driven initiatives where young people are literally the ones who are taking the lead in developing the programming and also taking the action. We cannot expect to represent youth views if they aren't quite literally at the table as you are today. And I know the United States government, and myself included, is committed to working with you and all young people all over the world. See, I was appointed by President Biden to lead our government's efforts to engage young people internationally in addressing the pressing challenges of today. And we want to build greater global connectivity by supporting networks of formal and informal youth civic actors like the summit's youth cohort to learn, to share, and to pilot new approaches. And we want to increase not just the participation, but the representation of young people in decision-making processes in civic life. I applaud Costa Rica for highlighting youth inclusion as their theme for the summit events. And I am grateful for the opportunity to be here with you all today, to meet you, to hear your stories, to connect, and to go back to Washington with new ideas in how to support young people in all different environments. And to all the amazing young leaders, obviously the ones sitting literally at the table right here, but the ones watching, the ones in the audience, the ones all over the globe, I want to make sure you hear again today, you are never too young to lead and make change. And by being willing to share our stories, we can learn from each other and tackle the barriers that can otherwise slow us down. Please, 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 if you leave here with anything today, I hope it is this: do not let doubt, do not let fear determine your future or that of your community, your country, and the world. Remember that you are fully, fully capable and have unique contributions to make. The world needs diverse perspectives to foster creative, innovative solutions. And we, your government partners, stand ready to assist. And that's an important lesson from your policy recommendations. Young people cannot do it alone. We have to adjust institutions to better support youth engagement. Collectively, we can all do more to allow youth voices to be heard and for youth to have, again, a seat at the table. And when we help youth empowerment, there are benefits for the whole of society, spanning all generations. I hope that you embrace this summit as an opportunity to gain tools and inspiration to strengthen your advocacy. And on behalf of the United States government, thank you, thank you, thank you for your hard work and your dedication to promote democracy and human rights. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Finkenauer, and I think you did an excellent job in wrapping up the discussions we're having this morning, and certainly leaving us with that hopefulness of the importance of engagement of young people, what the United States government has been doing and continues to do to support young people in youth engagement and democracies, as well as Canada, of course, and also Costa Rica. So we're very happy that you're helping us with this, and very proud that you're actually members of the community of democracy, so thank you for that. I will now turn back the program to Andrea.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and thank you for all the great intervention. We now have around 5 minutes left only for Q&A, so I'll ask the audience to raise your hand. If you have one or two quick questions, they can throw it into the mix. It would be great to hear, regardless of whether you're young or not young, we just want to hear your points. First one there, I think we have mics, huh? Or maybe you can. Yeah. That works.
Sí, mi pregunta es para El Salvador.
My question is for El Salvador specifically. They have the president of youth, the president of popular. They have a president that has achieved a great international visibility, but it's a president that each time more is following a line that we could call an authoritarian line. So when we're talking about youth participation as antidote for the authoritarianism, but we see with examples with Instagram, TikTok, Twitter to destroy democracy. How does the Salvadoran youth see this?
Lou, I think you are. You are.
Okay.
No, muchísimas gracias. Esa es la pregunta
Thank
del
you very much.
millón.
That's the question, the million-dollar question, I would like to say,
Son
because
preguntas del
these are
momento,
questions,
esta
they're
coyuntura, el
current
contexto político que está viviendo
questions
El
in
Salvador. Así que
the
muchísimas gracias por
political context that El Salvador is living
resaltar
right now.
esto y
Thank you
la
for
situación
highlighting that and
que vivimos los salvadoreños
the
en el
situation
día
that
a
we
día.
Salvadorans live on a daily basis.
Efectivamente,
Yes, certainly, El Salvador currently living a government that is
efectivamente muy
effectively
autoritario.
very
Tal vez
authoritarian.
al externo no
Maybe
lo parezca así.
externally doesn't seem like that, but yes,
La
what
información
the
que sale de El
information that
Salvador,
comes
y
out
aquí
from El
sale un
Salvador,
tema que
and here we
quería
have to highlight a topic
extender,
that
el tema
with
de la
Tina said,
desinformación,
was talking about
que hay muchísimo
misinformation.
también en El
There's a lot
Salvador.
also of that in El Salvador.
Si en algún momento,
And so if
puedo
at any
solo hacer un
moment,
paréntesis
and I want to
para
make a
arrancar,
parenthesis
si a
here,
ustedes les interesa
if
lo que
you're
está
interested in what is
sucediendo
happening in El Salvador,
por X razón, están
by
escuchando
X,
que todo
Y,
está muy bien,
Z
de
reasons you're
verdad
hearing
les
everything is doing
pido
fine, I really
un
encourage you
poquito
to
más integral,
research a little
porque
bit more
en realidad
integrally and more in
no
depth,
todo es lo que
because not
parece.
everything is what it seems.
Contestando ya tu pregunta,
Now, going to the
la
answer to your
juventud
question, the
salvadoreña,
Salvadoran
el
youth,
presidente
the
actual, por
current
supuesto,
president that we have, yes,
mayoría en popularidad,
has a majority in
es el
popularity.
presidente
He is the
más
president,
popular en
the
la
most
región.
popular president in the
Sin
region.
embargo,
Nevertheless,
las estrategias
the strategies that he uses intentionally
hacen que
make
se debiliten las instituciones,
that
se debilite la
institutions
democracia.
weaken themselves, that democracy
En
weakens
materia
itself.
de
And
estas cosas
in terms of these things, we have gone backwards
en El Salvador.
decades in El
Y
Salvador.
eso sumado
And
a
that
una,
added to the fact that
una
to
violación
the violation, exponential violation of human rights.
Entonces,
So
el tema la juventud,
the issue of youth,
pues por supuesto que
of
muchos
course,
admiran lo que
many
está
admire
sucediendo,
what is
pero creo
happening,
que utilizando
but
las plataformas
using
digitales,
digital
que
platforms
también
that
pueden
also
ser muy
can be
efectivas
very
para
effective, not only
reproducir
to
una narrativa
reproduce
de
a
desinformación,
narrative
pero
of
también
misinformation, but
una
also to
narrativa
reproduce
que
a
sí
narrative
esté
that
muy
is also
aterrizada en la realidad.
well landed in
Y
reality.
eso es
And
complementado
that is
a la
complemented
educación, a
to
lo que de
education,
verdad
to
queremos
what
los
really
salvadoreños
the
en este
Salvadorans
momento,
want,
en el
what
día
we're
a día
experiencing on a daily
de no
basis.
solo es importante
And
que
that
se
is,
eliminen
it
los
is not only
homicidios y
important
que haya
to
seguridad
homicides
pública,
come
sino
down
que
and that
también es
there'll be
importante
public
que
safety, but it's
se
also
vayan
important that those things
relacionando
go in
con
hand
una
by hand
institucionalidad
with
fuerte,
a strong
respeto a las
institutionality,
garantías
respect to
constitucionales a todos
constitutional
los salvadoreños y
guarantees to all
salvadoreñas,
of the Salvadorian
respeto de los
citizens, the
derechos
respect of
humanos,
human
respeto
rights,
de la
the
democracia,
respect of
para que debemos
democracy
de
that we
regresar
want
El
to see
Salvador.
return to El
Todas
Salvador.
estas cosas
All of
hay
these
que
things we
educar
have
a
to
la gente porque es
educate the
tan
people
importante
because it is
estas
very
cosas, porque
important.
no
Those things,
solo
why
es
are they
bueno
important? And because
tener
it
una
is not
parte
only
que
good
se
to have
cumpla
one
con una
part
parte de las cosas,
to
sino que es
comply with one thing of
efectivo
the
que
one
tengamos
part of
una
the things, but it's
integralidad
effective to
de
have an
cómo se hacen las
integrality
cosas y cómo
as
se
to how
manejan
things are done and how
digamos, los procesos y los mecanismos
the
que nos
process and
garantizan a los
mechanisms
ciudadanos
are
poder
handled,
hablar
ensuring
con
to the
libertad de
citizens to be able
expresión,
to
poder tener
speak
una
with freedom
prensa
of
que
speak
sea
and have a
muy
press or a media that'll
investigativa,
be very
sea un
investig
periodismo
researching,
independiente,
there'll
muy bien
be
que lo tenemos
independent
en El Salvador,
journalism that we have in El Salvador, but it's constantly persecuted
por el actual gobierno
by the
también.
current government
Entonces,
also.
las
So
plataformas digitales
digital
pueden
platforms
ser
can be
efectivas,
effective.
definitivamente son importantes,
Definitely,
pero
yes,
eso
they're
tiene que
important,
ser
but that has to
complementado
be
con una
complemented
educación vital,
with vital education
aterrizada en los
landed
hechos
on
y
the facts
enraizado en la
and
realidad
led
de lo
on
que
the
se lee,
reality of
lo
what
que
is
se
being
escucha,
experienced and not only what is being heard or reproduced in media.
Thank you so much. Next one.
Isa Shkena, mi nombre es Judith Ortiz, soy indígena
My
de Yuri de aquí
name
de
is
Costa
Judith
Rica.
Ortiz. I'm a Berber indigenous
La
native
verdad,
here in Costa
mi
Rica. The truth
pregunta
is, my
es muy
question
general.
is a general
Hace
question.
poco visité
A few,
Guatemala,
a short time ago, I
población
visited
indígena.
Guatemala. There's a
Se está
large
hablando de
indigenous population. We're talking
participación
about
a
participation
jóvenes,
to
en
youth
general,
in
pero a
general,
mí sí me gustaría
but I would
enfatizar
like
la
to highlight
participación
the
de
participation
jóvenes
of
indígenas,
indigenous youth.
que de hecho aquí yo veo
That,
la
as a matter of fact,
participación
here
es
I
muy
see the
poca.
participation is very
Ayer
scarce.
hablábamos también de ese
Yesterday, we
mismo
also
tema
talked about
con
that
la
same issue
compañera
with
de
a
Perú.
colleague from Peru.
Entonces me gustaría
So I
saber,
would like to
en
know,
Estados Unidos,
in the
igual yo
United
fui, tuve
States,
la oportunidad
and
de
I had the chance to
vivir
visit,
población
and I saw
indígena.
indigenous population.
Entonces, ¿qué pasa con
So
este
what
tema de la
happens with this
participación?
issue of
Estamos
participation?
hablando muy en general,
Are we
pero
talking
no
very
estamos
general?
tomando
We're
en
talking very
cuenta
general, but we're
la
not taking into
participación
account
de
the
una población
participation
que es
of a
sumamente
population that is
importante.
very important. Thank you.
I think Walter, you can maybe reply in 30 seconds because we need to close the Q&A. Go for it.
¿Qué tal? Completamente estoy de acuerdo contigo. En Guatemala tenemos
I fully agree with you. In Guatemala, we have 50% of indigenous population. A great part of this population is young population. And going back a little bit to my initial comment, what happens in Guatemala specifically is that the regulatory framework, the legal framework, institutional framework does not allow finding or offering the space to know the differentiated needs that we have among the different populations. I personally believe that we cannot put in one single box the problems of the youth. In Guatemala, we talk that's why we talk about youths in plural, because we understand that the youth is diverse, it lives different contexts, and it has different needs. That's why we have to find formal spaces to ensure adequate participation of all of those youths and that their voices are heard, and especially addressed in an effective manner through public policies. In Guatemala, the youth policy expired 3 years ago in 2020, and 3 years there has been no specific youth policy. And that is only one demonstration, actually, of the lack within the state of special attention that young people require. And that is, and following the call here from the colleague, it is an obligation of the states to acknowledge that and to do something and act.
I think we have time for one last question.
Yes, so my name is Rosemary and I'm from Guyana, and my question is quickly, what efforts are being made to include people with disabilities? Because many times what we find is that mainstream youth groups and so on, while they say diversity and inclusion, for some reason people with disabilities are often included from decision making. So I would just like to get your opinion on that, and what plans, if any, do you have for meaningfully engaging youth with disabilities? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very important question. Maybe Tina, do you want to jump in?
Thank you for the question and for involving this issue to the discussion. I would answer to that question in terms of the most effective way to affect the people's rights. This is the legal means. In Georgia, we have a specific law regarding the youth with disabilities, in general, people with disabilities. And there can be, based on youth policy, there must be action plan that should involve the specific programs and specific projects, like in Georgia, to help youth with disabilities to fully realize themselves and see themselves as part of the community as a whole. So I see to cut it short, the legislation and the mechanism that would oblige the states to have some efforts in that regard are the most effective based on the study of Georgian case, and not only in Georgia, in Europe as well. Thank you for your question.
Thank you so much. With this, I give back the mic to Patricia. I just have one final wish. I hope that as we grow old, we don't forget all of this and we keep on championing these youth rights. But thank you, Patricia.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you to all our youth speakers this morning. I would now like to give the floor for a closing back now to the Secretary General of the Community of Democracies.
Thank you very much. And in closing, I just want to thank our host, the government of Costa Rica, a member of the Governing Council of the Community of Democracies, for making youth engagement in public life a priority for the summit that's taking place all around the world. I want to thank you, Excellencies, participants, for sharing your ideas. And of course, I want to thank the youth leads that are present here and those that are not with us today. Not only have they given us policy proposals, very concrete, but they also shared personal experiences and stories from their activism, and that inspires, I think, all of us to fight for more resilient and inclusive democracies. I can say that at the Community of Democracies, our member states are working to give young voices a real platform. We're trying not to limit them to just social media initiatives or token speeches. Beginning in May, our Governing Council meetings of democracies from around the world will start a new best practice, and that is of inviting the active participation of youth leads in the activities of the Governing Council to bring fresh eyes to gridlocked issues. This, though, is only a first step. if we want young people to engage in democracy and to make it better, our democratic states, beginning with the community of democracy states, must provide further platforms for this. I can tell you that a bit later today, I think we're going to hear a very exciting announcement from one of our member states as to a way to more actively engage and bring young people into this. So I hope you're ready to hear some good news a little bit later today. I look forward to the remainder of this summit and the sure belief that we're going to learn about that platform and other future platforms that are going to make a real commitment to young people and their engagement in our democracies. So thank you very much for being here today, and I look forward to our next steps all together. Thank you. And that's it for now.